My name is Brock, and this is the Dungeon Master's Toolkit Podcast.
If you'd like to help us make more content, consider joining the Patreon. You can also bookmark our affiliate links to Amazon and DriveThruRPG to support the show with each purchase. Want a free way to help the show? Give it a review on your favorite podcast platform, or like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Finally, if you'd like to be on the show, or think you know a great guest, contact me on the Discord server or on Twitter. And with that, let's jump into the episode. Welcome, everybody. Today I have Ryan from Eyes on the Moon Studios. Welcome, Ryan.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Glad to have you here. Ryan, why don't you give us a little rundown about who you are and how you got started in tabletop role-playing games?
Of course, I'm a composer first and foremost, but the D&D thing ended up being a happy accident on TikTok, but I got started with role-playing games long time ago. I grew up in a house that was pretty Tolkien heavy. My parents loved The Hobbit, loved all that fantasy stuff, and I gravitated towards that pretty naturally. And I went to a game store because I'd been hearing about D&D and I'd wondered what it was. And I sat down for a game and it was a not great experience. And I remember feeling really not great about it. Like, this can't be what D&D is. I thought D&D was supposed to be really fun and exciting. And the guy that owned the store at the time was really nice. He pulled me aside because I was only 8 or 9 years old. And he said, I was hearing a little bit of your game and I want you to know that, like, you can play different than what you just did. If you didn't like that, because I can see you're a little upset by it. And I took that to heart and I really sat down and thought what I would want that kind of experience to be like. And next time I went to the store and played again, it was still just not great. And I went to that store owner and I said, well, what do you mean I can play it different? He goes, well, you can be the one that runs the game. You could be the dungeon master, it's called, and you can make the rules and you can decide how things are going to run at the table. And immediately I was like, well, that's what I want. I want to make it a really good experience for everybody because I wasn't the only one that didn't have fun. And it just struck me as wrong. So that's when that all got started. And I've been seriously DMing since probably 2006.
Sure, and all thanks to that store owner.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's really cool that he pulled you aside and actually said something because it'd be so easy to not do that.
Oh, yeah. I remember to this day, like, he was a bigger guy. And he just gave me this look and he gave me a little hand gesture of like, come here. And my mom was talking to some other moms and I walked over and he just was just really nice and really kind. And that's something that I've tried to be at my tables. And I don't always succeed, but I think as long as I'm trying, then that's what matters.
Hey, if you're trying to make it fun for everybody, I think that's kind of the main goal. So,
Oh,
what
sure.
system did you start out with?
3. And then I moved into 3.5 and then I played a good bit of 4th edition, but I played that while I was running games in World of Warcraft. So that was that side of it. And then I moved into 5th edition.
And is 5th edition kind of the primary system that you're playing in now?
Yeah, I would say so. And my 5th edition is sculpted and molded to what I need it to be. I've got a lot of my 4th edition rules in there. I've got a little bit of 3.5, but not as much just because there was so much that came into 3.5, especially at the end. I just kind of pick and choose when I need to.
I've heard that, for fourth wasn't necessarily received super well, but there's a lot of really cool mechanics in fourth edition. Do you want to
hmm
talk about some of the stuff that you've brought over from fourth edition and from three?
Sure. So 4th edition, I think, as forgotten as it seems to have been, I think 4th edition had a lot going for it. It was very tactical, and I think if they had marketed that game differently, it would have done a lot better because they chose to market 4th edition as if it was better than 3.5. This is the better edition, and I think that was a really poor way to do it. And when you break it down, 4th edition was really about placement and movement and how to combine your abilities with your allies to get a really good position on your battle map. And because 5th edition is not so much movement or location based, I've only taken a few things from 4th, but they're pretty prominent in my games. Big one is I use minions all the time. In 4th edition, minions were enemy characters that had all the normal attack stats and all the normal features of a normal enemy, but they only had 1 hit point. So it was a really easy way to fill up an encounter full of enemies and make your heroes feel really powerful by just wiping out scores of them with like a fireball spell or taking a bunch out in one turn with their multiple attacks in 5th edition. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and actually, there are several other systems that have rules for minions. I'm almost surprised that that didn't make it into 5th because it's such a simple rule switch.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an easy way to do it, and it makes your players feel super cool and powerful. I've also taken the bloodied condition, which I think 5th edition started to do a little bit recently with the mythic actions, but bloodied is basically when your enemies get to half health, they get new abilities or some things change on them. And I've definitely thrown that into a lot of my like boss enemies and such.
I was just gonna say that sounds very boss fight. You get through the initial phase, and then it's like, okay, now they change up their tactics. They got some new abilities, and now you got to figure out how to get through this portion of the fight.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then 4th edition had skill challenges, which you would be presented with an issue, say like you're on a train and the cart comes apart and you're about to fall over a cliff, stuff like that. And the skill challenges in 4th edition, especially in the modules, they were very limited in the skills that you could pick because it was written in such a way that you had the answer as the DM of what they were supposed to do. They didn't think for a minute that people would not want to use those. So what I've done is I've taken the idea of skill challenges and I just adapted them in ways to where instead of having only set answers, I'll just ask my players, this is what is presented in front of you right now. How would you like to go about doing it as a group? What sort of skills would you like to use to try to solve this issue in front of you? And then they'll come together, put their roles together, and then we'll kind of go from there. But that way, they still get to be creative with their skills, and it feels like they're doing something together as opposed to everyone jumping onto a perception or investigation check. You know what I mean?
And is this remind me skill challenges? Is that where you have to get like 3 successes before 3 failures or something?
Some places have it in a similar way. I always ran it to where it was a DC that I would just increase based on the level of the players and what I
Sure.
thought their skills would augment. I was never really big on 3 successes, 3 failures because even then you could have just 3 shit rolls and then they're not moving forward, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know one of the games that I play in, the DM likes to do something similar, doing the 3 successes and 3 failures. And I think one of the only other things is you basically can't do the same thing twice in a row.
Sure.
So you can use it, you like if you can justify the skill and your use of it, then that's fine, but you can't just do that 3 times. You have to come up with different ways to get through it.
Yeah, and I like that there's that clarification of you have to justify. You can't just throw out a skill because you got a good number. Like, how are you using it? Tell me how that's happening.
If you can narrate it well enough, then you can have it.
Right, and I think that so many times with dungeon masters, especially younger ones, and this isn't bad. It makes sense. You just have them say what skill they want to use, which is fine. But there's so much being left off of the table when that happens. And I find that when younger dungeon masters ask about, how do I engage my players? How do I get them more involved? I usually just start with like, how much are your characters describing in the world? How much of their actions are they giving the chance to describe? Because if it's not a ton, of course they're not going to be that engaged because they're not really role playing.
Yeah, you're just kind of like move here, push stat button, weapon attack,
Right.
whatever. Yeah, it can get a little bland in that way. Do you do other things to try and get players to participate and to narrate more?
Sure. I've always been really big on leading by example. So my games are very narrative driven. They're very narrative focused, a lot of role play, a lot of political stuff, a lot of things that require abstract thinking. And the biggest way that I have found to get my players engaged and get them involved is I talked about this in a video a while ago, but I before the game even starts, I sit them down, we all talk about session 0 stuff. We all talk about things that are important to them, not just as players, but as characters. And when I know what those things are, I'll take a bunch of them and I'll put them off to the side and I'll kind of let them cook for a bit. And then once some time has passed, I'll start pulling things from those lists. So, say one of my characters, or rather, one of my players' characters, is really big on finding a lost sibling of theirs. I'll wait maybe a session or two, or maybe even like a month will go by. And then I'll start sprinkling things of like, so and so brings up a part of your backstory that you didn't expect. And it could be an NPC, or it could be something that they find in a room, or it could be like a rumor that they hear. But that interest immediately is going to perk their ear because they thought that up. You know what I mean? I didn't create that, they did.
Right, they come up with it, and then it's just your job to sprinkle in those relevant bits along the way.
Yeah. And especially with role play, I find that, especially at the start of a session, I will never just, well, I'm not going to say never. I will rarely leave them to just sit there and role play among themselves at the start of a session. I'll always try to have an NPC, show up to engage them in conversation, or I'll try to have it to where they're already in a place where they were talking, because then that dead air moment doesn't really happen. You just have to jump into it because you're being spoken to by somebody, or you are waiting for someone else to answer you, and those things are really important.
So does that I know downtime and stuff for me sometimes feels a little bit off as even as a player if it's like, okay, you're here, you can do whatever you want. Do you try to keep how do you handle downtime, I guess?
So downtime in 5e is kind of tricky because I think it, like most of 5e, is purposefully very vague and very open-ended, and there is almost a negligence towards it. I find you could easily play the game and not do anything with downtime. In response to that, I have made it to where my players know when they will have downtime, but I have found ways to make the downtime be a bit more engaging because they'll still be talking to each other. They'll still be talking about what is going on with their characters' lives. And I'll often tell them, like, you've got 2 weeks of downtime. Tell us what you did in those 2 weeks, and
Sure.
we'll do roles like on the fly as we're doing those moments. So instead of, okay, here's an example. One of my characters in this campaign is a rune knight, a Triton rune knight, and he wanted to get really popular in the local like underground fighting ring that was in this city that they were in. So for his 2 weeks, that's all he did. And Xanathar's actually has mechanics for pit fighting, which is fine. And I had him run through those while other people were listening so they could be a part of the actual win-loss tension of his fights in the fighting ring. And the first one that he won was great. And then he said the next time, because there's 2 weeks, if anyone was free, he would have invited them to the pit fight. So then all of a sudden, his downtime is now including his party members who are going to see him fight in this pit fight. You know what I mean?
Was there any betting?
There was there was betting that happened like off screen, quote unquote. There wasn't anything that happened in the game, but the next time that he went after that second time, then they were making bets.
Nice. Yeah, I love hearing examples from people's games. Were there other characters in that game that had other downtime pieces?
Oh yeah, they all did. One of the characters wanted to do a bunch of research about a particular religion in my world, so they were doing that. One of them wanted to get in touch more with their archfey patron, so they spent 2 weeks in the Feywild, or in a demi-plane that was very, very close to the Feywild, because I warned them, if you go to the Feywild, if you try to come back, you're going to have to deal with the time displacement, and they didn't want to mess with that, which I get.
And so when they're doing these kind of downtime activities, what kind of I want to say rewards, but not necessarily rewards, but what kind of narrative comes out of this? Is there like mechanical things that they can get access to, or is it just narrative, reputation and stuff? What does that look like for you?
I think it depends on their intention. A lot of the times, if they just want to build a relationship with someone, or they want to find a way to improve a skill set, I will role play it with them, of course. But if they want to build a skill set, I'll throw them a bonus or so for having spent that time doing that, especially if it's like more than a week and they're just dedicated only to that. I'll throw them some mechanical advantage. But if it's more abstract, like I want to get to know this noble better, or I want to spend time ingratiating myself to this group of people, then that's going to be more of what they do through their role play. Because I don't agree with the idea that just saying that you do something means that it's done. I'd like to see it happen. I'd like to see how it comes across, because sometimes in the interim of those things happening, the unexpected moments that come up through natural role play make for some really good story elements later, and I don't want to skip over that.
And if you're already in downtime anyways, it's a good break from the kind of standard adventuring role play, I guess.
Sure, and I will admittedly not do a ton of downtime because I like for my games to feel as like engaging as possible. And the downside to that, of course, is that sometimes my players feel like everything they're doing is at breakneck speed. But what I've found works really well with that is every session I treat as if it's its own small narrative arc within the larger narrative arc of the story.
Almost like you're running it like a one shot almost.
Not like a one shot. So think of it like how in a season of a TV show, there is a big overarching narrative for that season of that TV show. And each episode feeds into that narrative while also having a narrative arc of its own.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good way to look at things in general because it is more episodic than like a movie would be.
And mine certainly are. I've found a really good group of players that plays together really well. And at this point, the campaign's been going over 4 years. So we know each other and we know how to play off of each other. So that gives me a lot more freedom in that way.
I was just going to ask how long your games typically go or your campaign. So it sounds like a long time.
This one is, yeah, I will admit, after this one, just because we're all, getting older and life is what it is, I've considered shortening down campaigns using a bigger world that I would be able to just do more stuff with, but shortening the actual length of the campaign. But that's just, that's just me because I don't play in person. I play online. We use Foundry, and two of my players are out of state. That's the only reason why I would prefer to play in person. I love playing in person, but I'm going to do what I can do to make sure it's consistent. And I think playing online is one of the big things that helps us make it consistent because over pandemic and all that, we were still playing.
Yeah, I mean even for me the only group that I have near me that would be in state or potentially in person, everybody's in state, but we're still like 3 or 4 hours away from each other.
Yeah,
So it just still doesn't it won't result in a physical game, unfortunately. So I
sure.
totally understand the online nature of that. Go
It
ahead.
helps. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It
No, you're
helps.
fine.
It helps because in the holidays we get together and be in person, and those are great. But then outside of that, we still know every Tuesday we're playing. This time, you know, excuse me, you know what date it is, you know what time it is. It helps us stay consistent because I think the worst thing you can do to a game is leave scheduling kind of up in the air because then it's never going to get done.
Yeah, unfortunately, I am very familiar with that. The games that I play in tend to be scheduled one session by session, and then sometimes it's like, oh, it's been 2 months.
I see.
It gets tricky.
Yeah, that's something that I'm very adamant about is I know what day of the week I can play. I'm the DM, so it's going to revolve around that. So I set the players down. We all figure out what day can we all consistently make this happen. And I have two groups that play in alternating weeks, but I play every week. But they're all in the same world. You know what I mean?
Sure. So, do you use a homebrew world where you've kind of built up
Yep.
everything yourself?
Yep.
Do you want to talk about your process for kind of coming up with the campaign setting?
Sure. I start off with a question. All of my campaigns are based around questions that I want to explore within not just myself, but within the players and their characters. So, like the current campaign that I'm in right now is called the Goliath campaign. And short history about my world. In my world, there was a city called Goliath, and it was this almost like Camelot esque place. It was like the height of human advancement at the time. Like people from Goliath were virtuous and they were true and they worked to progress themselves in the world and they were so adamant about just constant like support and it was just like a great place, idyllic. You'd want to live there. And then one day, for a reason that is currently unknown to the players, a massive army of orcs appeared and attacked the city from one side. And while most of the defenders were dealing with that, in the middle of the city, this giant portal ripped open out of the sky and devils came pouring out of it and attacked the city in the center. And then the city fell. The land was cursed and shrouded in this mist that no one's been able to get through for 40 years. And there was a 10-year war after that, trying to reclaim as much of the land that they could. And once that was done, the world was left in this place of, okay, well, now we've got no one trying to attack us, but now what does the world look like? And the question for the campaign is like, what does it cost to be a hero? And I think I've been seeing a lot of really interesting answers from the players because not all of them call themselves heroes. And it's been really interesting to watch them engage with this world where all these people were so tense for so long trying just to, survive and figure out if they were going to win, but now they have, and now it's been, 40 years, 30 years, and it's still not fully resolved.
Sure.
So once I've got the question, I start plotting out a lot of what I think the narrative tryst points are going to be. I never plot out an ending for my campaign, and I never plot out what I think my players are going to do. I think that just leads into a lot of dead ends. But what I do is I set up all of the history that I think is important up until the point that the heroes are going to start playing. And then from there, I set up what the important story figures are currently doing and what they've been doing in the past probably couple months. And then once the players start, everything from that is just reactions on what they do and what the NPCs were already doing behind the scenes, even far away from where the heroes are at.
Right, kind of that living, breathing world is still things are still happening despite it's not like a video game where time doesn't move unless you go on quests.
Right. And one thing that is really helpful with that is it allows me the chance to still think about and be in the world when I'm not playing because I have to think about everything that happened in session now has a reaction. What are those reactions going to be? What is the world going to look like based on what the heroes have done? And where they are not, what is going on with all the other things? And honestly, it requires a lot of prep on my end. I do months and months worth of prep before I even bring players in for a session zero. But what that allows me is by the time they do get there and by the time we do start playing, I have to improv less because I have all my notes. I've got all the things that I know are going on. And when they ask questions, I usually, have pretty quick answers.
Right, having everything in your head to some degree and at least knowing motivations of factions or NPCs or whatever is going to make it a lot easier to kind of extrapolate, well, okay, what is this group of people going to do in this scenario based on what the players did.
hmm
And when you do your session 0 with your players, how much input do they have on kind of the story that they're going to experience?
It's a good question. So by the time that they arrive at session zero, I will have already written up a story prologue, like a primer, and I'll give that to them to read before they get to session zero. And that does a couple things. It helps me set tone, it helps me set expectation of the kind of setting it is. It helps me to let them know a little bit of what sort of story beats have already kind of been happening. And then when they get there, I purposely leave a lot of areas in the world blank so that when they sit down, we can all kind of talk about what kind of character do you want? What kind of things do you want to have happen? What kind of places do you want to go? And then how can we make these things in the world to where you already feel like your character has been a part of it for a while because they have. They've lived there their entire life.
Right, they weren't just plucked up and, "Oh, now there's this person," you know? So so you let them kind of fill in some of those blank spaces based on who their character is and what they wanna be.
Yeah, exactly. So, for instance, in my current campaign, one of my characters is a monk, and she wanted her character to be from a monastery that was not necessarily known to the common person. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. So she's a air Ganassi, who we have changed over to lightning Ganassi because she wanted to do more of that, which is fine. And what we came up with was the city where she was born in, her parents didn't have any idea that she was going to be born a Ganassi. They didn't know what to do with her. They knew she was special, but they didn't want to have her not live up to her potential because they were just farmers. So they went to this traveling, monk that was nearby. And they said, listen, we have this girl. She's just a baby. We don't know what to do with her. We don't want to have her waste her life on a farm. So the monk brought them to the monastery. But the trick of it is you can only get to the monastery if you already know where it is.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. So the monk knew where it was, so they were able to get there, essentially.
Yeah. So they took the daughter there, and then because they knew where it wasn't like they couldn't come visit her, and she still has a great relationship with her parents, but that's where she
Sure.
That's where she grew up, and that's where she, became a monk.
But it's not necessarily like on the map somewhere.
Well, it is, but you can't just be a person wandering around and find it on accident.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So your average person would have absolutely no knowledge of at least the location. They maybe have heard stories that this place exists, but who knows where it is, like
Yeah,
Atlantis or something.
right. And then when she got to that city, she could take her allies to the temple the monastery, because she knew where it was. She just walked right through the forest, and there it was.
Makes sense. That's a cool little backstory piece to have for that character. Maybe not necessarily a home base, but a hometown in a way.
Oh yeah. And I will sit down and I will think up NPCs that are important for that character that we both know about. So it's not like I just walk up and in the middle of a session I'll be like, "You remember this person from your past who did this?" Because that feels like I'm putting them on the spot. Like, "Oh, think of a reaction to this person right now." That's not fair.
Sure. So you work with them. Is that through like the session 0 or just kind of offline outside of the game?
A little bit of both, because sometimes as the game progresses, I will think up different things and I will have different ideas for subplots and storylines. And when I do, I'll reach out to certain players if I think they were going to be involved or would be interested. And I'll suggest, a connection there or a tie or a bond. And then we'll kind of talk about what that would look like.
Sure.
One of my characters right now is an Archfey warlock who used to be a Great Old One warlock, and she switched patrons because she didn't like the other one, which is fine. That's caused drama, but that's been fun. Either way, she grew up in a very high society town, and when she was going back to the town, this had been years after her character was introduced, so she's been traveling for a long time, and we had a conversation about not only her family but all the other families that she would have been in contact with because she was part of that high society upbringing.
Sure. So her coming back would be kind of a big deal or would be noticeable at least.
Yeah, and she would also be expected to know who these people were because she grew up around them.
Right. Yeah, that's very cool. It's always fun as a player to have your backstory, I guess, more woven into the world and just having those connections to the world and to the game that you're playing in.
I love doing that. It makes a lot of things easier on my background. It makes a lot of things more fun for them because they feel like they're connected and that, like their thoughts and feelings on the world and the story matter. And I think they do. They're going to be invested in it just as much as I am. They should have a say in some of the things that go on with their characters.
When you pitch the like primer to your players, do they ever have much feedback on that? Or like have you ever had it where they're like, "Yeah, we don't want to play that. We want to do something more like this?"
Sure. So I've been playing with more or less the same group of people since 2010, maybe a little after. So most of my World of Warcraft DMing time was spent with a different group of people, and I miss them a lot. They were great, but this other group is the people that I went to school with and the people that I just hung around with a lot at that time. And in that time, we have run a lot of different campaigns, and some of them have been 2 sessions in, and they're like, "We kind of don't like this for whatever reason," and that's fair. And when I was younger, I got my feelings hurt a little bit because I took it personal. But the more that I stepped away from it and left my ego, on the side, the more I recognized there's 6, 7 other people here that want to enjoy this time too. It's not just about what I want.
And how do you go about shifting, like, because you do a lot of prep, how do you go about shifting to match kind of what they are expecting?
Sometimes it does take a lot of work, not gonna lie, and sometimes you just have to have enough self-awareness to recognize this is not going to be what they want. This is not going to be something that I want to change to fit what they want. So let's just take a break. Let's play board games or whatever for a few weeks, and I will make something else, you know?
Yeah, you keep your scheduled game time every week, but then you're giving yourself a break to come up with something else. That makes sense.
And honestly, I think it helped me grow a lot as a storyteller because when I realized that my own enjoyment came more from them also enjoying what was going on and me seeing them have fun with the world, it changed how I looked at my stories because it was no longer just about, do I think this is cool? it became, am I giving these people enough space in this story for them to feel cool, for them to feel like they are important, that they are vital, that they're heroes in these worlds and stuff. Like that's why in my videos I tend to call people the heroes more than the players, because I feel like we're playing these games to be more than just, passerby.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. One of the other questions I did want to ask you was how does your composer background fit into tabletop role playing games?
That's a good question. And thanks for asking it. Haha. So, I've I've been a musician my whole life. I've taught myself guitar, bass, piano, drums, a little bit of accordion. I've always been more musical than anything else. And when I was growing up, especially in high school, I thought that I was going to be a lawyer. Like that was going to be my job. And I was starting to have not panic attacks, but I couldn't sleep and I felt trapped. And I went to my mom one day and I said, "Listen, I don't know if I want to be a lawyer. I don't feel it inside, and I don't want to disappoint you, but I really want to be a musician. I think that's what am supposed to do." But my all right, when I was born, my grandfather, before I was an hour old, he put a guitar pick like in my hand before he even picked me up. You know what I mean? And
It
that's just,
was destiny.
well, yeah, he was an amazing guitar player, and when he passed away, he left me almost all of his guitars, and I still have them. And I've always been that type of person, that like guitar playing, musically inclined person. So when I told her that I wanted to be a musician, she wasn't upset. But what she did say was, if this is what you want to do, you've got to figure out like a plan. You've got to know how you're going to do it. And for a long time, I thought I was going to play live and tour, and that was going to be my life. And then in 2014, I was in a really serious car accident. Like I shouldn't be here kind of car accident. And for 3 months, four actually, I was bedridden. I couldn't move. And I just had to sit with myself and like really look at my life and figure out what I wanted to do. And after that, I recovered and I just looked at the world different, and I tried the touring thing. I played in a side band. I was playing bass for them and I did a little bit of touring, and I just felt empty, like really hollow and really empty. And I realized I enjoy making music. I love playing it, don't get me wrong, but so much of touring is just being in a van, going to the place where you're going to play, and so little of it is actually playing. And I didn't like it. So I came home after all that was done, and I looked at my wife and I said, I don't want to be a touring musician. I want to be making music. And that was, oddly enough, right around the time that pandemic hit. So then I had always been writing instrumental music before, and I had always been writing it around concepts. And I realized that's what composing is anyway. So I just switched over to composing, and since then things have been, thankfully, picking up in terms of interest, because I spent 10 years trying to get people interested in my music, and it felt like nobody really wanted it because I combined instrumental music with storytelling on stage. So imagine I would get up on stage, tell stories about my life, about the car accident, about what I learned from it, about all the crazy things I'd experienced in my life. And then I'd play a song that was based on that story, which really is just me composing to my own life, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Then when that wasn't working, I realized this show helps people and it's good to help them heal, but if I can't regularly put it on, it's not going to be my life. It's not going to be my job. So I've switched over to composing, and composing's not my full job either. I'm getting, closer every day, but it's not replacing my full income yet. When I tie that to D&D and fantasy games, being able to write music for places that I've designed in my head keeps me from having to go look for some track that is kind of close but like isn't right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
And
That's how I
that's
feel
why,
about battle maps.
yeah. And like that's why I love working with dungeon masters and other people. Like I've met a few people on TikTok now that I've been able to talk to and write music for, and it's so great because they tell me these things that are going on in their heads, and my job, my challenge is to make that in music. And when I listen to the tracks with them and when I get to share that with them, their enthusiasm makes me feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. You know what I mean? This is what I'm here for. And it's a great, really great feeling.
And so do you compose or do you do a decent amount of music for tabletop or is it kind of like based on commissions, or how do you kind of deliver that to the world?
Well, right now I am trying to build up a reliable client list. So what that means for me is when I started doing the composing, I recognized not everyone is going to have like a song for me to write for them every week. You know what I mean?
Right.
What I'm going to have to do is find enough clients to where the revolving door of them needing work and me being able to work for them needs to be enough to where it'll be sustainable. So I've done short films, I've done commercials, I've done theme songs for radio shows and stuff like that. I'm just now beginning to move more seriously into the fantasy genre because I've been a fantasy fan for so long. I know what it sounds like to me. And the idea that people would need music didn't occur to me until I saw Dimension 20. And I thought they could use music that is not just some other track. They could use personal music. And that's when I started trying to reach out to DMs. And I've actually done a few for map makers through Patreon, which has been fun. But
Sure.
the big thing that I'm trying to push right now is on TikTok. I see so many amazing dungeon masters talking about their games and their worlds, and they're so passionate. And all I want to do is reach out and be like, listen, I get what you're talking about. Let me help you make some music for that. And the downside is that sometimes they can't, afford the rates, which I always, for new clients, my first minute of music for them is free. I want them to work with me. I want to work with them. I want to build a relationship. Beyond that, that's when we start talking about rates and royalties and stuff like that. And those things don't get complicated because I've got a system where I've worked out how to handle those things with them one on one. I want it to be as easy for them as possible to work with me and vice versa. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah, I get that from a business standpoint because my wife and I do some like web design and stuff kind of on the side. And yeah, making it as easy as possible for clients to work with you is important because that's how you get more.
Yeah. It's that, and it's
That's
also you just got to be nice. You got to be kind because in the music industry, especially, if you are found out to be just a bad person to work with, you're not going to get gigs, and people are not going to call you back, and they will tell other people about you so fast.
yeah, I think that's probably most industries, but yeah, if yeah, once people aren't well, I mean, we're seeing it kind of right now with the D&D brand, right? If you are proven to maybe not necessarily be trustworthy, then people don't want to buy your stuff.
You know what blows my fucking mind? I'm sorry, can I curse or no?
No, you go right ahead.
You know what blows my fucking mind about that whole thing? All Wizards of the Coast had to do was shut the fuck up and let people make stuff. That's all they had to do. And D&D would have still been this amazing game that everyone loved because it just was. People were making stuff for it. It was free advertising for them. All they had to do was just not be shitty, and they couldn't fucking do it, could they?
I so a couple things. I feel like the lawyers that they hired were probably paid better than the game designers would be paid to just
Oh,
make more
sure.
stuff, you know? So like using your resources wisely potentially. And then I mean they have D&D Beyond. If they set that up as a marketplace to allow all of the third-party creators to be like, "Hey, you can publish your stuff to D&D Beyond. You can have people buy it on D&D Beyond and then you get a cut of it, like any app store whatever, right? You know, your traditional like processing fees and royalties and whatever. And just let you just be the marketplace and just let people buy your stuff, buy other people's stuff. As a company, you would rather be the platform, Amazon, eBay, Apple, whatever, than an individual seller. And it seems like they forgot that they were the platform and they are trying to push people out of all of the other individuals out.
It's a few things too. To to sit there and with no doubt in their minds to put out a response to the community that said, "We always intended to get your feedback. We wanted to hear what you had to say. That's why we included these contracts you had to sign by this date so that we could get your feedback after you'd signed." Like, go fuck yourself. Who do you think you're talking to?
Yeah,
You
that
know what I
first
mean?
response was very
Do you know how
uh
many people pick apart dialogue in this hobby? Do you have any idea who you're talking to?
I remember seeing a Twitter post that was like they decided to do this for a hobby of people who specifically like to analyze rules and rule books.
Exactly. It's
It's
like
maybe not the right audience.
I I said it in a video that I made already. I hate Wizards of the Coast decisions. I hate Hasbro's decisions, but I love D&D, and I'm brokenhearted over the idea that I cannot financially help D&D grow because I want it to grow. All these people that are leaving D&D and talking about how great other systems are, I get that. I think a lot of other systems do a lot of stuff much better than D&D, but I love D&D. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I want
Yeah,
D&D
for
to
sure.
grow and be a better game, and I want people to recognize that Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro is not D&D. We are D&D. The stuff that we do at our tables, that's D&D. The problem is that we don't own that. We don't own all those intellectual rights. We don't own the processing. We don't own the means to produce stuff like that. But we could have. And if Wizards of the Coast was smart, like you said, all they had to do was set themselves up as the place for these creators to want to go. And they didn't do it.
They were so close to
And
a lot more money than they already had.
really, they when they purchased D&D Beyond, I already felt like something weird was going to go on with that. It just felt like a really sudden second-handed move. And then when everything started to fall apart, I was really frustrated because if they were trying to make a ton of money, all they would have had to do, kind of like you said, was, hey, listen, if you want to publish stuff in D&D Beyond, go ahead. We've got the OGL. All you got to do is put it on this platform. We'll take our cut to promote you and get you out there, but you get yours. You'll get more than we get, in the long run. Or even if it's comparable, you'll get what you get, we'll get what we get, but you get to be a part of this platform where people can find your stuff and search it and buy from you. We'll just take our bit. And that's all it would have had to have been. And they would have made a ton. More than I think they expected.
Well, and it would have funneled more people into the hobby, right? Because they're already
Exactly.
so or into the D&D ecosystem specifically.
Exactly.
Because and I think kind of like D&D Beyond initially, like everybody's subbed, you have all of that content, like you're gonna play that one because you have all of the stuff for it, right? Like why would you spend time playing other stuff when you have, you're putting time and money into your subscription or whatever, books that you have digitally or whatever. And there's an alternate reality somewhere where that did happen and that's like a Kickstarter stretch goal, right? For all of the new tabletop stuff, like, stretch goal, this much money and we will make it directly integrated with D&D Beyond services and then other people can buy it after the Kickstarter goes live, right?
Yeah.
Could
It,
totally see that being in a Kickstarter or
it's
something, right?
oh sure. And it's incredibly frustrating because the more and more that we talk about it, the more and more time goes by, the more and more I keep seeing this fabricated argument somewhere that Wizards of the Coast is not, they're not actively listening to everyone. They're not going to read the reviews and the feedback. And my point is, they weren't listening in the first place. Wizards of the Coast never had our best intentions in mind, and don't think that they did, because they tried this shit back in 4th edition. You know what I mean? They did this shit already, and we saw it happen, and that's part of why I think 4th edition is not looked at as kindly, because they tried to publish 4th edition in a way to where
Right.
it wasn't a part of the original OGL, and so many people at the time, for a lot of other reasons too, were just kind of, thrown off by that. So the idea that is permeating that, like, Wizards of the Coast always, like, had our backs and is just now suddenly acting weird. It's like, no, they've always been like that, but they own D&D. Because when TSR was falling apart and they grabbed it up, that's when, things started to shift.
Right. Yeah, and I wasn't in the hobby much when that stuff was happening, so I have less of a I just know the like stories of kind of what happened, but not necessarily witnessing it firsthand.
Well, at the time, there was like an online character builder and an online battle map system that they kind of wanted you to use, and it was really forward thinking. I don't think a lot of people were ready for it at the time, to be honest with you, but a lot of it also just felt like you've got to sign up for this, and you got to use this, and you got to be a part of this. And especially before the world was like it is now, as far as like being a part of online communities and stuff go, people
Right.
just weren't about it and they weren't ready for it. And Wizards didn't lean into that in a healthy way. They were just like, well, this is better than 3.5. This is better than all that. And a bunch of people were just kind of holding their hands up going, why? You have all this material you've made for 3.5. We have all this stuff that we have made for 3.5. Why would you try to convince us that this new system is better when you've given us no evidence for it? And quite to the contrary, some of it is outright not oppressive, but it's almost obtuse to get into.
Sure. Yeah, it kind of just goes back to our conversation about like you want it to be easy for clients to come in, right? So if you
Yeah.
make it more difficult and more expensive, then that's not going to happen.
Oh yeah, and kind of bringing it back to like the music thing. Not only do I want my clients to be happy with the work that I do, I want my clients to feel like working with me is something that they should look forward to. Not because like I'm a super awesome badass guy, but because I want our experience to be pleasant. You know, I want them to feel like when they come to me for a product or a business exchange that they are going to get just as much out of it as I get, if not more.
Right, and that's just part of the value that you provide as a business essentially.
Right. And I have only had thankfully positive experiences in the past, and I think most of it is because I invest in people on a personal level because I know the money will come later, if that
Yeah,
makes
I
any
think
sense.
that's a good way to look at it.
There's a there's a TikTok account right now that I'm writing some music for. They reached out to me and they said, "I love your music. I would really like to have a theme written by you for my session 0." And I was like, "Cool. These are my rates." And they were honest. They said, "I don't know if I can afford that right now, especially not for session 0." I said, "Okay, that's fine. Your first minute's free. Let me write you a minute long thing just for your session 0. And you can have that and that'll be that and then we can move forward from there." And I've kept in contact with them, and I'm writing the music right now. And as I'm writing it, I'm realizing this is going to be longer than a minute, but I'm going to give it to them anyway because I want them to have it. You know what I mean?
Right. And you're providing more value than or you're over delivering.
Right. Is it going to be like some 5 minute long, masterly orchestrated piece? No. But is it going to be more than they expected? Absolutely. And they're going to get it on time, and it's going to be a good product, and they're going to be happy with it. And I'll be happy with it too. Because if I was writing a piece of music that I felt needed a bit extra, I'm gonna put it in there because I want the product to be good. I want the song to be good, just because my name's on it. You know?
Right. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's really cool that you do the composing side of things because I feel like I've talked to quite a few people and I haven't really talked to anybody that has done music specifically. So it's really cool to have you on for this. I know, have you ever thought about writing music and doing something like I think it's tabletop audio and there's a couple other places where they have just like they compose music and put it out there and then people can go and use that for their games. Have you ever considered something like that?
A lot of times with those types of companies, you have to be either like invited in or they have to like offer you an extension, like an invitation to work for them. And I wouldn't be opposed to it by any means. But what I do find is when those sorts of things happen, I lose a lot of that one-on-one interaction with my clients, and I need that. I require
Sure.
that big bond so that they want to come work with me, you know, and that's part of how I invest in myself because I've already had it happen to where I work with someone, I do a good job for them, I do a great job for them according to them. They do, you know, they love what I do. They said that it was great. And then they will tell their friends and they will tell people in their fields and they will come looking for me because they know that I do a good job.
Right, it's that word of mouth, it's that free marketing that you're after
Right. And if
to
I
some
was to
degree.
join, yeah, and if I was to join one of these production companies, I would lose a bit of that. And I have found more benefit from working one on one with people than I have just writing kind of neutral tracks that I just throw up on a library. What I have
Yeah,
considered is starting up a Patreon where I would make tracks that are a bit more open ended that anybody could use, and then people could just jump onto that.
right, I think I've seen 1 or 2 other Patreons that do that, and I think the tabletop audio kinda has a I think they maybe have some, like, Patreon exclusive stuff. I think a lot of it's free, but then patrons get extra bonus content or something. But yeah, that could be viable as well. So, just out of curiosity, what do you like, if you're going to come up with a piece of music, what is your process for that?
So that's one of my favorite parts, honestly, is no song ever starts the same. Sometimes I'll be really inspired by an instrument or I'll be inspired by like a bit of a melody that I heard or maybe like some chord changes or just a rhythm. Or sometimes I'll get with a client and they'll be talking to me and just hearing them talk about their world or what they want is enough to like get my brain really going.
Sure, it's just that one-on-one it really is that one-on-one conversation, essentially.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I could sit here and write music all day and it could be stuff that's all right, you know, it'll pass, it'll get put out. I'll finish it and it'll be whatever it's going to be. But the instant that I feel someone else's passion for what they're doing, I feed off that. I'm like a vampire.
Oh, that's not all bad.
No, and
They
I
live.
think
They live
that's
longer.
well, yeah, and they're not great in 5e, but whatever. There's other editions.
Is there anything that you want to chat about before we drop off? Anything in particular about running a game or prepping for a game or music or whatever?
So this is something that I think I never have enough time to talk about in TikTok because I already make videos that TikTok tells me are too long and people don't watch them to the end, and that's whatever. I get it. It's a quick platform and that's fine. My biggest thing that I really love about my composing and about working with other people in general is there's so many of us that have such cool ideas and so many unique ways to like see the world and interpret it and put it back out for other people. I want to work with these people not just so that they get a really good piece of music, but just so that I can tell them like these things that you think and these things that you feel are important, not just to you, but to the world. We need more people being creative. We need more people that are making things because there's so much regurgitated, recycled, reused stuff nowadays. And people wonder why it's not like affecting them as much because it's not genuine. It's fabricated. And I get it. It's a Hollywood machine and that's fine and it's its own thing and I don't want to touch it too much. But when I talk to these creators about their little D&D worlds that they feel like no one gives a shit about and I see their eyes light up or I hear it in their voices or I can just tell that all they want to do is share. I want that. I want people to know that it's okay to talk about those things. It's okay to be excited about those things. I want to listen to all of it. I want more people to put their stuff out in the world. And I feel like the more people that do that, the more people are going to see who we are a bit underneath the surface. Because I feel like in today's culture, we are so starved of genuine connection with people. We are so hungry for people to know us as we really are and to talk about these things that are so exciting for us, these things that are so powerful for us, whether it's D&D or music or whatever. I just feel like when you really talk to someone and you really learn about what they are and what they think is important and what they think is funny or cute or what they're afraid of, like these things that we are so hungry to share with each other, it's insane the kind of stuff that comes out of that. You know what I mean? Just these bonds that we are making with people. That's where the best memories come from. That's where the best stories come from. And I don't mean to get like too deep about it, but it almost brings me to tears to think that some people are not sharing with other people for fear of not being recognized or heard or accepted or at worst ignored. That fucking breaks my heart is when I see people on TikTok and I'll be scrolling through and it'll be some low view account just talking, just screaming out into the void like I just want someone to see me. I just want someone to recognize I'm sad and I will comment, I will do whatever the fuck I need to do just to make someone feel like for a minute, hey, I see you. I get it. I can't do everything for you, but I want you to know you're not completely being forgotten about.
Yeah, we're all in this together kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
I've
and it's
seen people say
it's
that
it
a lot.
yeah, it's more than just that though. It's not only are we in this together, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad that you are you and you're not me because more ways to see the world, more art, more creativity, more stories, that's the dream. That's the goal. I don't want people to be like me. I don't want people to play D&D like me. I don't want people to write music like me. I want you to do whatever you want to do. And I want to celebrate how cool that is because it's yours. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's all very well said, and I think that's a really great note to end the interview on. That was
Yeah.
surprisingly thoughtful and deep of an ending.
Yeah, I tend to when you get me really going, I tend to talk about a lot of the deeper stuff because that's where I think my my real heart gets pulled towards. And I tend to bring it out of people, sometimes for the worse, but I think it's important.
It's good. Like you said, it's we don't always get a lot of that these days, so I think it's very good.
Oh yeah.
Well, Ryan, do you want to talk about where people can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So on TikTok, I'm Eyes on the Moon Studios. I have a Bandcamp, which is under Ryan Munns, Muns. That's my name. On YouTube, I am Eyes on the Moon Studios as well. I just changed that over. But the big thing is I really would like people to reach out not just to work with me so I can, try to make more of my composing, but I want people to reach out to me because I want to help people make their games and their TV shows or their movies or whatever sound more like what they want them to sound like. I don't want to write the music that excuse me, I don't want to write the music that I just hear. I want them to feel like this piece of music is something they have been hearing for a long time and now they finally get to have because we were working together on it. It's not just me scurrying off into my basement and coming back with music. I want them to be a part of it.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real treat. I've enjoyed this.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Dungeon Masters Toolkit podcast. You can find links to all of the products and resources that we talked about on the show in the show notes. And if you'd like to join the community or find out how to be on the show, check out our subreddit or join us in our Discord server.